Hello, everyone. Welcome to the March episode of Wright Virtual Visits. My name is Eric Rogers. I'm the manager of events and communications for the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone tuning in live today. We apologize if you had a little bit of trouble finding the stream. Facebook loves to change things on us, and we had a little bit of a surprise when we tried to launch. But we are off and running now. As we get started, I want to thank profusely my co-organizer in this series of events, Anna Kaplan, the executive director of the Grey Cliff Conservancy, who is working behind the scenes to help us, as well as to thank Allison and the whole team at Forever Ready Productions, who have helped us level up our game with the video production for these events and keep these shows running smoothly all year. We are incredibly grateful for their support, and you should definitely check them out if you ever need anybody to make a video for you. So we're really excited today to be visiting the Hagen History Center in Erie, Pennsylvania, and they have installed the San Francisco office that Frank Lloyd Wright worked out of. And we're going to learn a lot about the history and how that came to be in Erie from the team there. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. Of course, feel free in the comments to let us know where you're watching from. You'll see that flash up on screen as we love to know where everybody is. And of course, drop your questions in the comments at any time. We will have some Q&A time at the end of the show, and we'll get to some of your questions then. So with that, I'd like to invite Jeff Kidder to come on screen with me. Jeff is the architect who supervised the reconstruction of that office at the Hagen History Center. And I do also want to acknowledge our partner in crime, Pam Parker, who is behind the camera at the Hagen History Center and helped make all of this possible today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff and Pam, and y'all can take it from here.
Okay, great. Thanks, Eric. My name is Jeff Kidder. I'm a local architect here in Erie and had the honor of being able to work on this project for the Hagen History Center. I want to give before we go in and get a tour of the office, I want to give a little background information about the office and then explain how it ended up here. So the office itself was completed in 1951 in downtown San Francisco, but the whole history of the office really goes back into the late 30s when a young student from Florence, Alabama named Aaron Green decided to go to architecture school and went to Cooper Union in New York City. And while he was there, learned about Wright's work for the first time and really became a fan of everything Wright had done up to that point. And when he graduated, he went back to Florence, Alabama, worked for a local firm. And while there, a couple that he knew wanted to design a house, and he recommended that they hire Wright to design that house. And luckily, Wright agreed to it. It's called the Rosenbaum House in Florence, Alabama. And Wright really appreciated Aaron's interest in passing work from himself on to Wright, and he hired Wright to supervise the construction of that project. When that house was done, Wright invited Aaron to join the fellowship at Taliesin and further his studies, and that began their lifelong relationship. In the 40s, and there's a picture, I think, of Aaron at Taliesin as a student around 1941. After leaving the fellowship, Aaron moved to Los Angeles to begin his profession and stayed friends and stayed close with the Wrights over the years. 1951, Aaron went to Taliesin West as he tried to get there once a year and mentioned to Wright that he was going to be moving to San Francisco and start practicing architecture up there. And Wright immediately came up with the idea of joint venturing, and he asked Aaron Green to be kind of his representative or spokesperson in Northern California because he was trying to get some work up there. So that began the search for an office space that they could share together. And they ended up, Aaron found space on the second floor of a 4-story building at 319 Grant Avenue, which we have a photo of the building. And you can see on the second floor where the windows are outlined is the space they initially rented, 900 square feet, with windows only on the street side and all the other sides windowless. Wright and Aaron talked, communicated, and had a general idea about the office. Aaron started with some schematic drawings, would send them off to Mr. Wright, and then he would mark on them. And we have another photo of the plans kind of marked up with Mr. Wright's adjustments and thinking of the design. And that sketch there is pretty much what became the final built project. And then Aaron and another architect, they built it themselves, and it's all out of redwood, which we'll see here soon. But the big question is how did it end up in Erie, Pennsylvania, which, if you don't know where Erie is, we're halfway between Buffalo and Cleveland, and immediately north of Pittsburgh on Lake Erie. So Aaron, after Wright passed away in '59, Aaron continued his practice in the office and ended up taking over the 3rd and 4th floor of the building. In 1988, the building sold and the rent was going to be raised. So they decided to move to a different location. And he had no use for the office interior, so he was able to make a deal with Thomas Monahan, who founded Domino's Pizza and was a big Wright collector in the 80s and 90s. And Mr. Monahan purchased the office and some other objects. And the office was dismantled, packed up, and shipped off to Ann Arbor, where it basically sat for 4 years and nothing happened to it. Mr. Monahan never ended up reconstructing it. In '92, it was sold to the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh for them to reconstruct within the larger museum. So from '93 until about 2001, the office was there for the general public to see, but you couldn't enter it. You had to look in through the windows like you were a pigeon on the windowsill. In 2001, they reprogrammed the space, dismantled it again, put it in crates, stored it for a few years, and then in 2004, they decided to auction it off at Sotheby's, and it didn't sell, so it went back into storage for a while, and then ended up being purchased by Jim Sandoro in Buffalo, New York, who had Buffalo Transportation Museum. And because of the presence of Wright buildings in Buffalo, he was going to reassemble it to use it to draw people into his museum. Instead, he ended up building a gas station inside his museum that Wright had designed that was never built. So the office sat until about 2016, when Jim and our patron of the Hagen History Center, Tom Hagen, who is chairman of the board of Erie Insurance here, which is headquartered here in downtown Erie, came up with the idea that the office needs to be reconstructed and needs to be accessible to the public, and that Erie would be a great place to reconstruct it because it's already moved a couple places, but Erie is strategically located on the path between Falling Water and Buffalo. So anybody that's traveling to see these sites in Western Pennsylvania, Western New York, has to travel right through Erie. So it was a way to kind of fill the gap in what's now known as the Great Wright Road Trip, which is a 4-day four-day event of traveling around and seeing about 10 Wright buildings in Western New York, Western Pennsylvania. So I was charged with reconstructing the office. So what we ended up with was 27 crates, which we have a photo of the crates in a warehouse, and a set of drawings that were from 1988 to deconstruct it. And then we had to basically create a building to put it in, which we did here. And then now we can go ahead and enter into the office. What I do want to point out here is this would have been at the top of a stair from the street, Grand Avenue, and you would have come up, and this is the original door. One thing here is you see the red tile, and we have one on each side, but these tiles were made by Aaron Green's mother-in-law at the time, who was an artist, and actually her sister had hired Wright to design a house in Arizona that ended up burning down very early in its life, but She made them, and Aaron actually put his initials in it, and they fired them, and then they sent them down to Wright, and he would use them on his different buildings. So the office itself is 900 square feet. It's basically 3 primary spaces: a reception, kind of secretary area, lobby, and we'll see some other ones, but there's a drafting room and an office. But this is where the secretary would have sat and greeted visitors. What's interesting about this space is that it was a working office. It was never open to the public like public buildings or homes are now. It was really just employees, clients, sales reps, mailman. But this is kind of a great shot looking down across the front of the office where all the windows were looking out onto the street. The other thing to be clear about here is everything that's wood, all this is all redwood. When it was built is all the original interior that was dismantled, and everything that you see is painted is the reconstruction of the original space of this 319 Grand Avenue building. But what's great about this is this was started as just a box with a 14-foot ceiling, and the Wright and green design is this almost like a big piece of furniture kind of that you walk through and insert it into the space, where nothing higher here is 6'10", and then you have the full volume above. But as we move this way through the reception, these are the drawings that were done to where all the individual parts were labeled when it was dismantled. And then we have some objects here that are that Aaron Green had put into space after Wright had passed away. And then you also see various furniture throughout the space that was original from day one that Aaron had constructed per Wright's design. Next, we're going to move over into the drafting room. I'm going to let Pam walk through this under the soffit, kind of the compression, and into the drafting room here. So you can see this is just a big volume with all the natural light coming in. One thing that was interesting challenge with any kind of removed or relocated interior is this one in particular was, since the windows were such a feature of this building and we're not in San Francisco and we're not on the second floor, that we did want to let natural light come into the space. When it was in Pittsburgh, it was buried in the inners of a large museum building. And so we wanted natural light coming in, and we also wanted to make sure that the visitors could actually walk through the space, which they couldn't do the last time it was reconstructed. But luckily, there was an architect in Buffalo, Pat Mahone, that does Jim Sandaro's work, and he was able to get up into the original second floor of the building in San Francisco and take a picture looking out, so that we had a photo of the building across the street, and we were able to blow it up, put the graphics on the window, but still let natural light come in, just in an attempt to make you feel like you're not in Erie, but you're in downtown San Francisco. Two other things that I want to show you specifically, because they've been in the news lately, but the Della Walker house in Carmel that just recently sold, I think there's a photo of that, which was designed in the early 50s. But what's interesting on that specific house is the roof. When it was originally built, the roof had always intended to be copper, but at the time, either the budget wasn't there for it or the material wasn't there to do a copper roof. So Wright came up with roof panels made out of steel that were porcelain enameled. And this is a sample that was done at the time to approve for construction. But this was the first row of the roof with this kind of abstract dental molding here that you still see in a house in copper. But it was actually steel, and steel on the Pacific Ocean with the salt water ended up not being a great material choice and ended up really kind of rusting away. And 4 years later, a copper roof was actually put on it. But we have this as a memory of what was on there from day one. The other building that this office had involvement on was the Fawcett House, which was designed 1956, about an hour and a half southwest or southeast of San Francisco. And what's interesting, that house is currently for sale right now. It's on the market. It's a beautiful house out in the agricultural landscape of Central California. But we have a whole set of working drawings for the house here. And what I like about this house is that it's set up on a 120-degree angle and very reminiscent of the design here of the office with the screen wall that they use to break up the different spaces. So it's nice to have this here and show how Wright's ideas were being transformed from a little 900 square foot office buried in the second floor of an office building to out in the open landscape of California. The final space we're going to go into is the inner office. Pam will give you another view of the drafting room here first. So the final space is here, what's called the inner office or the private office. And this is where Wright would have worked when he was in town. He tried to get to San Francisco, 3-4 times a year, and he would meet clients here. And what's interesting about this is it's the only part of the Wright kind of insertion here that has a ceiling in it. This has a glass ceiling so that the light from the windows would still get back in here. But it's a very intimate space. All the furniture is original to it. Some of the objects here, one of the kind of the great parts of working on this project is when Aaron Green passed away in 2001, he left his architectural practice to an architect in his office named Jan Novi, who had worked there for about 30 years. And Jan took over the office. He's now retired and lives in Berkeley, but I've been able to become friends with him and been out to visit him a couple times. And he's one of our direct first person links to this space. He wasn't there when Wright was there, but he was there with this office and they worked out of this office. So we used him a lot to bounce ideas and I guess historic accuracy off of him. And he still has a bunch of stuff from the whole time he was at Aaron's office. But the objects on the table are objects that were either there when Wright was here or that Aaron added afterwards. But one item in particular that Aaron really appreciated, this was a music box that Mrs. Wright gave to him later on. And as a thank you for friendship that they had over the years, but she wrote the music, and I'll just play a little section here. So that's a kind of a cherished item of Aaron's that we're lucky enough to have on loan here. And then another item here that's really of interest is at the entrance to the office, there was this weaving a curtain that Aaron Green's wife at the time, Jean Haber, was a doctor, but her hobby was weaving, and she wove these curtains with Wright's input on the colors and pattern and stuff, and we still have these here on display. So next we're going to move out to a gallery here, and Pam will take you there. So outside the office, we have another gallery that has some other items of interest here. One in particular is over here. And this is a model of the butterfly wing bridge design that Wright started in the late 40s and kind of worked on and developed through the early 50s as an alternative for a new bridge between Oakland and San Francisco. And Aaron was integral with the design and marketing it and building the model. And we do have a photo of Mr. Wright sitting with the model in the office, which is great because this is 100% tied to the history of the office. Now, this model was purchased by Thomas Monaghan when he purchased the office, and he's held on to it in his collection. And we were lucky enough to be able to have it on loan from him, to have it here, to kind of tell the story of the office itself. So then that's kind of the end of the tour. One image I want to leave on is we have a great photo of Aaron and Wright getting ready, or either going or coming back from a meeting with Marin County officials. So Aaron is really the one that was able to get that commission for Wright, because since he was already in San Francisco, he had done work for them and public housing and stuff. And when they were ready to build a new civic center, he really encouraged them to interview Wright, and hired him. And as we know, that's Wright's largest public building to date. And so construction wasn't started until after Mr. Wright passed away, but since Aaron was right there, he was able to supervise the construction, and pretty much this whole time practicing architecture, he was involved with it. So that's kind of a great image of them in the late 50s. So I think that's it. If there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Well, I love to go out with that image of the two of them getting on the helicopter. You really get a sense of, the fact that all the way up until the end of his career, Wright was, a high-flying architect. He was out there, his time was valuable. He didn't drive across to Marin County. He took a helicopter. So yeah,
one more thing, Eric, that's interesting is Aaron and Mr. Wright are exactly 50 years difference in age. So it's just kind of great to see, an elder architect mentoring a younger architect all through his career.
So we've got a handful of questions that have come in, and I want to encourage anybody who's watching live, you can continue to send in questions. We'll get through several of them. A sharp-eyed viewer has spotted something in the room you're in now that you didn't talk about. Can you briefly tell us about the car that's on display?
Sure. So this is a 1950 hotshot Crosley, and this was partially an idea that, as I mentioned, Tom Hagen, who purchased the office, and Jim Sandaro in Buffalo at the Transportation Museum. Jim's idea, he had an idea that said, well, we should get a Crosley hotshot because it's the same era as the office. And as you might know, Wright really liked cars and had a lot of cars over the years. But if you can see this here, we have a photo of Mr. and Mrs. Wright in a Crosley, just like this one, that he had a fleet of them, maybe 5 or 6 of them, that this Taliesin students would use to drive around Taliesin, Wisconsin, and take them out to Scottsdale. And this isn't one of his, but we painted it Cherokee red and made it kind of in the flavor of the time period.
Well, that's really neat. Another great tie-in there in the gallery. So question about the history of the office itself after Wright's death. So it remained in use from 1959 until 1988. Were there major changes made to the office after that? And did those changes then have to be kind of undone in any way or factored into how you reconstructed it in Erie?
Yeah, there really weren't any changes. It was, Aaron kind of treated it almost like a shrine. They used it as an office, but they really preserved it as is. They did end up making the drafting tables bigger so that they could fit more people in there to draft, because it was originally set up only for 4 people, but they made it set up for 6 people. Otherwise, it's pretty much as it was from the day they built it.
So you were involved in the reconstruction project from start to finish. How long did that take?
Well, it took a few years from the purchase to getting the building built, and then actual reconstruction only took about 4 months, because we had the space ready for it. It was really just, we didn't empty all the crates until we had the space ready. And actually this gallery we're standing in was kind of the staging room, and we opened up all the crates and figured out, if we had everything. We were missing a few pieces, but we were able to replicate them of redwood. But once we had everything laid out and had a plan put together, and I guess the biggest thing was where do you start? You start in the middle, the corner, but we were able to have some good finished carpenters that we worked with, and it took about 4 months from beginning to end by the time we had it all done.
But of course, the planning took a lot more than that. It was years in the making, right? So I know you touched a little bit on the view through the windows and sort of the steps that you went through, with Pat Mahoney taking a photo showing what it looks like out of that original building. Is that the view that would have existed back in the 1950s?
No, that we do have some photos out the window in the 60s. It's the same building, but what we see in this photograph, it had a different facade put on it since the 60s. And I think right now, even that building has been torn down recently and the new building's going up in its place. So it really is what the building looks like in the 2000s, but it's the same building that was there in the 50s and 60s.
Might have to send Pat back to take an updated photo.
Right.
So, as we start to wrap up, of course, one of the goals of Wright Virtual Visits is to encourage people to visit these places in person because, as great as video tours are, they're not a substitute for being able to walk through the space, which, as you mentioned, is something that people were not able to do when this was previously installed. So can you tell us a little bit about what the visitor experience is for people that want to see this office when they come?
Sure. So it is housed within the Hagen History Center, which is also the home or headquarters of the Erie County Historical Society. And before this office was here, the focus was regional history, Northwestern Pennsylvania. But now with the office, we have this kind of more global visitor interest. But the campus here in general, if you see a photo of the campus, but it's made up of 4 historic buildings. The Watson Curtsey Mansion is in 1891, Richardsonian Romanesque, that was designed by Green and Wicks out of Buffalo. And that's part house museum, part gallery of regional history. The carriage house behind it is the visitor center. That's where you start. And it's also administration and gift shop and research and archive and library. And then the building to the right is the Wood Morrison House, 1858, has more exhibits and history in there. And then the building behind it is is where the office is. So when you come here, you can learn about the local history, changing exhibits, permanent exhibits. But when you come in to see the Wright office, there's either docent tours at certain times. Otherwise, it's just you're able to wander, through on your own and see it. But you can experience all the primary spaces. And as I understand it, there are actually some talks coming up if people want to go more in depth about the history of the office. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Sure. So next week, next Wednesday here in Erie, we're bringing the author of this book, Paul Turner, who is an architectural history professor at Stanford. And he wrote this book on Frank Lloyd Wright in San Francisco. And he's coming next week to give a talk here in Erie about the office and well, since Paul's from that whole area, from San Francisco area, he's going to kind of bring his firsthand knowledge of the history, the people behind it, people involved with it. And then he's also we're taking him to Pittsburgh on Thursday night to give a talk down there at the University of Pittsburgh Architecture School. Great. Well, I think as we draw to a close, Jeff, if you just want to let people know how they can learn more and plan their visit. Sure. So the Hagen History Center website is a great place to start. That has all the information. Hours are Tuesday through Sunday, in 9 to 5, and or 10 to 5, and there's information on there. But really just start with the website. The phone number's there and all the event schedules there. But we're glad to have everybody come and visit.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. It's great to get this tour and all of this inside knowledge from the person who really put this office together in the space. So we really appreciate that. And apologies for the phone ringing. As we wrap up, I just want to encourage everyone who's watching, of course, to visit the Hagen History Center, do the Great Wright road trip. It's worth it to make the drive from Falling Water through Erie and then up to see Gray Cliff and the Martin House in the Buffalo area. And of course, we want to urge everybody to tune in for Wright Virtual Visits next month. Will be happening on April 20th, and it'll feature the Krause House, known as the Frank Lloyd Wright House in Ebsworth Park, near St. Louis, Missouri. So I think with that, we'll sign off. Thank you very much, Jeff and Pam and Anna and Allison, for making this happen. And until next time.
Thank you.